When last we spoke, the topic was, and still is, our project for a PowerSafe 60 kilowatt hour version of our PowerSafe 100. Danu, how is it coming?
Well, we got the batteries in place, we got the inverter moved in there too, and we have the vent holes cut.
They didn't like my wheels on account of they were splayed and kind of crooked. So I see you built an angle iron frame and put our cast iron wheels. Does it roll?
Yes, sir. Right now it's
locked. You've got it all locked up, don't you?
We have 4 bolts on the outside mounting the Wigman onto the frame. And the frame is made out of steel, pure steel, and it's pretty strong.
And so the bolts are on the outside. If I took out those bolts, I could lift the whole thing out.
Yes, sir.
And hang it on the wall. Excellent. We were mounting the batteries. And I see you've got 8 batteries here.
Yep.
And they are solid as a rock. And 4 over here. And your inverter mounted on top of that. And that is just, man, they're building this like a tank. This is going to be a lot better built than the PowerSafe, believe it or not. It just looks more solid and compact. It's not going to be as easy to get the stuff as the PowerSafe. That was kind of a prototype development. This is going to be smaller and more compact. You can still disassemble it. You can still change a battery module.
Yes.
If you had to, but it's going to be a little more work. Because we're putting it in a smaller box with a smaller thing. Now the contactors you've got here on each side, how does that work?
So in the PowerSafe we had the copper bar, and then we had the contactors mounted onto the copper bar, but since this was such a tight space, we couldn't have copper bar. We have some copper bar here to get the 8 batteries together, but as you can see, there's a bunch of orange wire because that's what we were able to use. So we had to put the
Those are X-rad shielded
2/0. Yep.
Cables.
And so since we couldn't mount them on the copper bar, we put the 2 contactors on the side, and we used the orange cable to go to the contactors, and from the contactors to the inverter.
Show me your little board here you're building.
Yeah.
Of course, we're space constrained, so he made a little narrow board that goes between the 2 battery sets and on top of his contactor assembly there.
Yep.
What all you have going on here?
So this half of this board is basically what's on the bottom shelf of the PowerSafe 100. So if you look, you have the 48 to 12 volt DC to DC converter, 12 to 5 volt DC to DC converter, which goes to the display. And then we have 1 bus bar here for 12 volts and another bus bar here. It's always better to have more if we need more. So
this is just to make connections for 12 volts.
Yes, sir. And then our ESP32 sits here, and we actually did this wiring today. We have wiring for the BMS, wiring for the IVT.
This goes to your positive contactor.
Yep.
This goes to your negative contactor. And of course, we use a 4-wire system and contactor that has an 8-pin plug because we put 12 volts on a set of aux contacts, and when it closes, we bring that back into our box and detect it. In this way, we can detect welded contactors. And some Christmas tree lights.
Yep.
What's that?
So this is midnight solar. So if you remember, in the PowerSafe 100, we had the big outlet boxes on the sides, so we were able to mount those in there. But with this one, we didn't want to put this on the outside because we are making this portable and also able to be mounted on the walls, so we didn't want this to break off. So we're putting these on the inside.
Okay. And that whole board will lay down through here.
Right in the middle. And one is for the input, one is for the output.
Set that down there.
Yes, sir.
This is coming together very nicely, Dano. Good work.
Thank you.
And we need to put some of this in a little context with work we have not done yet. We are going to have 3 connectors across the front here. One of them is going to be a NEMA 14-50 4-prong connector like you would connect at an RV park for 240 volts AC. We'll have another one down here that's exactly the same thing, but for our AC output. And in the middle, we're going to have a Rebling 48 volt connector. What could you use that for? Well, you could hook in another battery. You could take the output of these batteries and run a separate, different kind of inverter. We're just going to make it available. And we're going to use 3 switches. Do we have one of those switches here? I stole these off of Sandy inverter because I liked them so well. They're kind of a heavy-duty switch.
Yep.
It's actually hooked up to a 3-prong or 3-pole 175 amp AC circuit breaker. And this switch kind of takes a rotary motion and converts it to flip the circuit breaker switch. And that'll be mounted on the outside here.
3 of them.
There'll be 3 of them, yes.
Yes.
One for that NEMA 1450 AC input
Right
from
there.
the grid or from some source to recharge it. And one of them on the output.
On that side.
And then we're going to use one on the 48 volt Rebling as well.
In the middle.
In the middle. You notice this is kind of unusual configuration. It's not all entirely crazy. You can use this in your home or garage and connect it with cables like you would an RV.
Mm-hmm.
But the size and shape of this is going to be very handy if I wanted to forklift it on the back of the Volkswagen pickup truck.
Okay.
And I've got a portable power system with 60 kilowatt hours power and an inverter.
Indeed.
This would be a big system for an RV, but I've seen RVs where it would fit right in where their current AGM batteries are. So it's not crazy talk to do that. But this would be something you can put in the back of your pickup truck or use it at home. And actually you can move it around back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
We can put this on a truck, take it down to my house and use it there. And we might do that.
Portable batteries.
And so it's a smaller version of the PowerSafe 100, but we want to take advantage of that to make it potentially mobile.
Mobile power.
And so our connections are going to be a little less permanent looking than the PowerSafe 100. And our size and the way we orient our enclosure is going to be slightly different as well. Mostly just for flexibility. In truth, we'll roll this up against the wall, throw some cushions on it, tell the kids it's a couch. But it'll be a fairly interesting couch. I see you've also got our thing back here is 2 portals with screen for the output of the inverter for cooling.
Yes, sir.
So if the inverter gets a little warm, it'll start sucking air out of here and blowing it out the back.
There were 2 5-inch holes we had to use the hole saw to cut into. And that was not easy, cutting through 14 gauge steel, I believe. And it took us some WD-40 and a lot of energy to cut through it.
So we do have it unlocked.
Yes.
All right, so it does roll around.
Yeah.
Not as easily as I'd like. We're using smaller cast iron wheels, but it does roll.
Yes, sir.
So good work. We will keep you posted on this. We're down to adding those connectors and switches in the front, doing some final wiring, and this thing will be ready for test.
So today we're going to talk about an item we have on the store. It's the 160 amp circuit breaker, 3-conductor. And we are here, James and I, Danu. We're going to show you how we're going to set it up on our PowerSafe 60. And these are actually based on what we saw on the Sandy 20 kilowatt inverter. They just look much sturdier and they're very small compared to the big 100 amp circuit breaker that we have on the PowerSafe 100. And so actually it's not a circuit breaker, it's just a switch. But this one has a built-in circuit breaker and it's also the switch, so it's pretty cool. And so this is kind of what you get when you get the box. Oh, hello, kitty. You're not in the frame. So this is what you would get with the switch. And James actually has a box right here. He's going to show us how to set it up. And this is what we're going to use, this plate, to mount it on the PowerSafe 60, what we have back here. So James, do you want to show how we're going to do this?
Yeah. So if you buy them or when you order them, you'll get them in this white box here. It'll have all your components. It'll come with blue and white box, a metal gear component, the switch itself, and then it'll come with a little, call it an axle, or it's a piece of metal, and we'll show you where that goes. The only thing that does not come in this box is what we made, which is a 4x4, what is it, 1/4 inch ABS, and we cut the diameter in the middle, 26-inch diameter, and then we did a little Dremel work and also with the mill along one of the sides. We'll show you why we did that here in a minute.
And this is our first prototype, so this is kind of our first design of mounting this on the PowerSafe. And you can see we actually have one mounted already, and we'll show you a video of how we mount it. But we have some ideas that might include a plate on the back, but that's still in the pipeline, so we're just going to show you our first idea and how we mount it.
So in the blue-white box is your switch, the 160 amp. Take it out of the bag. It also comes with 2 gold screws with nuts and washers. We don't use them in this build right here.
They sent us a lot of screws, didn't they?
They did. And the gear component that switches, this in this bag there's 4 screws. We're going to be using the 2.5 inch screws. The other ones put back in the bag, save for later. There's 2 black screws already in there, keeping the cover on so it doesn't pop off. So we're going to take those out. And those are just 1 inch all threaded. And when putting the cover on, make sure you figure out how you want the switch to turn, because when Danny and I were doing it, we had some troubles figuring out if we want it on and off and how the cover works. So in this way, we're switching the switch or the circuit breaker to off. We're putting the cover on top.
You can see the mechanism, the gear mechanism that has to line up with the switch. It will basically sit right there in the slot.
And then once you have the switch in the gear mechanism, there's a little slot that it slides into. Put the 2.5 gold screws back in the spot where you took the black ones out of. And then you're just going to take your drill, tighten those back down. And those are tight. Next we're going to move on to our little metal spindle, we call it, I guess. We're going to put it in the middle, like so. Once again, you got to make sure with your switch everything's aligned correctly, because the ends here line up with the switch in the off position.
Yeah, so this axle is what basically goes through our Wigman casing, I guess, and then connects to the switch. So when the axle turns, that turns the gear mechanism to switch it on and off.
So in our bag also there's 4 screws. They send these so you can use them to mount it. We're going to use our own screws, which we're going to get to here in a minute. So we're just going to leave those in the bag and set those to the side. Alright. Let's see. That is off position, off position. So we're good there. So we're going to take the switch off and we're going to tighten our 5/16, I believe it, no, our 8mm nuts here to make sure we're tight. The spindle is tight. There's two bolts to make sure it's secure. Alright. And then the addition that we added, our prototype, I guess, that we're using for the PowerSafe 60 is once again the 4x4 ABS, 1/4 inch thick.
What are the holes that you have drilled there?
There's a lot of them. So the middle hole is for the gear to go through, or for the spindle to go through, and then the outside 4 right here are to account for the protrusion that the bolts that secure the gear to the metal. It's a lot of moving parts, but those so it sits flat, and then we have our. Let me make sure we're sitting on it correctly.
Nice.
Actually, have to flip it around, Dan. All right. So now we're on there. I don't know if you guys can see that. It's kind of far away, but the bolts for the metal bracket are seen through there. So our ABS sits flush. Then we take inch 11/16 bolt.
Did anybody see a house fly around here?
Uh-oh.
Oh.
Gotcha, you little bastard! You guys can go ahead.
Thank you.
We got flies out here for the
Yeah.
summer, so Jack's keeping them away.
So we're gonna get our. Let me just throw it at you real quick. Our 1/2 inch 7/6. Now I'm all confused.
That's
Our
7/16. 7/16, right?
I thought it was 11/16.
Oh, that's the nut. The
Okay,
head,
not
yeah.
7/16. Danny's right. We're putting them through the holes right here to secure our ABS to the bracket.
So the idea of this is the 7/16 bolt with the 11/16 head will mount this ABS board to the switch, and basically the switch is sturdy on there with the ABS board. So the idea is we can use the 4 holes on the outside, and we would simply mount that and the switch together on the plate, and this ABS will take the weight of the switch and hold it in place.
And the main reason we came up with this design, and we have kind of some others in the pipeline, like Danny was saying, just because it's a compact design, and with you'll see here in a minute how close the batteries sit to the switch. So we didn't want too much metal in between there in case something would happen. So tighten those on there. So as you can see, everything's secure. The only thing jiggling that you hear is the gears moving back and forth. So then from there, we would drill a hole into the Wigman PowerSafe to fit the spindle through, and then we'd slide that on. And then we'd take our 3.5 inch machine screws, put those through, and you gotta screw it in, but the idea would be you put this through with a nut and a washer on this side to secure the switch to the Wigman or whatever structure you're trying to secure it to, and then you'd have a nut and another washer securing the ABS so that the ABS doesn't move. And we'll go into more detail because I have trouble explaining in detail that kind of aspect of
That's
it.
a lot of nuts and washers, but yeah, we already have it drilled somewhat here. You can see the hole in the middle for the axle and the 4 holes on the outside for the switch. And this slot right here is for our rebling, because this is going to be our DC output switch. But we can show you how it's done, and we'll get
a little more detail.
Yep, we'll get into that here in a second. Do you have anything else you want to cover, James?
No. I'm getting bit up by flies though, so I wonder where that bug assault's at.
All right, stay with us.
The switch, 160 amp switch with our ABS on it. I'm going to show you how we load it into and tighten it into our PowerSafe 60. So first I have our 3-inch or 3.5-inch machine screws inside the switch, or screwed into the switch already. I'm going to slide that in. As you can see, it's kind of a tight space in the PowerSafe 60. We're going to put our washers on all 4. And since these switches will be used regularly and fairly often, we're going to put a spring nut on them, or spring washer, I think they're called, on all 4 once again. In this part that might take a little long, we're going to thread a nut on there. And like I was explaining before, we're putting these on first so that we can tighten the switch to the Wigman to relieve some of the pressure off of our ABS. Well, probably should have done that first, but that's okay. Alright, that one on. We're going to do hand tighten for right now. And then we're going to hope I can get this in there on the first try. So then you take your switch, or we take our switch, and we thread it in there. Let's try to get some of these wires. Uh-oh. That's not good. Let's see if we can come at it from this end. I know I'm probably blocking the shot here, but... Oh, yeah. We might have to cut. Yeah, I think we're going to have to take this off. No, we got to... That way? I think we jumped the gun here, James. We're going to loosen those back up because we need a little room in here that we didn't account for before. Alright, so we're going to give ourselves some room here. Bless you, Richard. Alright. Woo! Nice. And, as you can see, if you're still with us, that took a while. We got our switch in there. We're in the off position still, yep. And then we're gonna make sure our nuts don't hit the ABS, so we can slide it down. Seems like a lot of work, doesn't it? Alright. Switch is on there. We're going to repeat what we did in the beginning. Tighten down those 4 washers, spring nuts, and nuts. And I just remembered something, so that's not good. putting 4 washers and bolt on there. Alright. This last one on there. It's a tighter fit. We're going to take our drill, tighten the switch to the Wigman. If I can get the hole. Whoa. All right. We're going to turn our washers for the ABS a little tighter, making sure the ABS is still level. Which it is. Put your plier on the back. Tighten it in. Come on, James. There we go. Doo-doo-doo. And the last one. All right. And there she is. Might need to do a little more tightening, but she's on there. She switches. And that's a PowerSafe 60 DC output.
James, this is looking stellar. Show me what you got. Show me the money, buddy.
Yeah, so the money is we got all our switches.
What's your first item over there?
Our first item is our input, AC input. It's got a NEMA right here we plug into.
1450?
1450, yes sir.
Yep.
And then we got our switch, which it goes to turn it on and off, which is a circuit breaker also. Those two stuck to the Wigman, nice and solid. In the middle we have our DC output with the Rebelin. It's what we use for the PowerSafe 100 also.
It's actually an aircraft connector.
Okay.
Rebling aircraft connector. I like them. They're kind of stupid expensive, but very nice for 2 big cables.
And that wires up to the other switch.
Uh-huh.
Turn it on and off. Our circuit breaker switch. And then
And that goes to the output of the contactors
Yes, sir.
that also go to the inverter.
Sure.
So that 48 volt output is switched by your controller. So if you hooked another box with 48 volts to that sort of bypasses. You could shut off the battery in here and work on it actually while you have a 48 volt input running your inverter. Or you could use that as a 48 volt output and run a LED light or something. Or whatever, running on 48 volts. And what do we got over here?
We have our AC output.
Oh yeah, that's the payday part.
Yeah. So as you can see, there's a lot of switches, or not a lot of switches, there's a lot of output. Here's our NEMA, which then goes to our gang output, and then our switch.
Does the switch?
The switch switches.
It doesn't make switching noises.
Yeah, we have a little bit of wiring left to do.
You don't even actually have the back of the switch on that, James.
Yes, sir.
You're trying to pull a scam on our viewers. But that's what it's going to look like. So we'll have 120 volt output. Is there 4 there?
Yes, sir.
Flip those open for me. Looks just like in my house. And then that's your AC output from the inverter.
Yep.
And this switches both of them?
Yep. Switches both of them. So you can use
So
it
if we didn't use this in a house or a telephone facility or whatever, but we put it on the back of a truck and aim that out the back side, you'd have access to your gazintas, your gazatas, and all your switches.
Yep.
So this is everything I detest about electronics and the last 40 years of my life, 45 years. A whole wall full of connectors and switches, which is where the problem always lies. And but it looks gorgeous if this switch would work. It doesn't make a switch noise. See,
Yeah.
that's how I knew it wasn't there. If I was troubleshooting this,
I would have made it.
that'd be the first place I'd go.
Try to do a little sound effect.
A switch is
Yeah.
switch or connector is where human hands can go. That's probably where it's broken.
Yeah. Well, we'll get that in there, and then
But
we'll
it
work
looks
on
great.
the display.
Richard says this isn't worth $50,000.
I don't think he's worked on one.
Well, I would say he has no idea what you all put into this thing, but so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to price it at $49,995. I understand that's not $50,000. That's a lot less, and it sounds less, doesn't it?
It does,
So what's next? What do we got left to do?
All right, next, well, we got to put that switch on, which you pointed out. But I got to put the inverter display, the Raspberry Pi, our e-stop, LEDs, so a few other things for our top display.
Well, that's going to be very interesting because at least over the inverter, I don't think you can fit them.
Yep.
And you got some room here
In the middle, yep.
in the middle, and maybe for some things over that left battery pack, but not very much.
It's going to be compact.
Nothing very deep. Well, that's I announced at the beginning of this that that's kind of the thing is we know we can get 11 pounds of potatoes in a 10-pound sack. Can we get 12? And so far you're doing pretty good. These switches are costly, and they're costly with space projecting into there.
6 inches, yep.
And my observation is they're a pain in the ass to put in. But we've already used 3 of them.
Yep.
So we have just 97 left in the web store.
Just for you.
And they're a shit show to put together and mount. But they're pretty cool. And so I had to buy 100 to get these 3. Oh well.
Yeah.
So you're going to do me a very artful layout here on the top.
Yes, sir.
Let's see if this will close now. And you're going to lay that out so I can kind of see it from here, right?
Yep.
So it'll all sort of face this
Kind
way.
of be right in the middle there,
A
yep.
lot of it will be in the middle, yeah.
Then she'll be ready to test.
I gotta say, it looks great. It looks a lot tighter and a lot slicker than the PowerSafe 100.
Yep.
Although it isn't 100 kilowatt hours.
Nope.
But it looks good. Maybe we won't sell it. Maybe I'll just keep it and look at it.
Yeah, we can put it on the Doka.
Yeah, we could. Then we've got us a power truck.
I like the sound of that.
Last time he was charging little cell phone things. Now we can charge like buildings and stuff. So more power.
More
Tim
power.
Allen. Stay with us. All right. Just by way of review, I wanted to show you our Enphase combiner panel. This is actually not an Enphase panel. It's an ordinary loads panel. We bring down 5 pairs of cables from the roof. They're not Enphase cables even. They were actually DC cables before, and we just reused them. But we could use regular house wiring for this. We're only going to generate about a few amps, 6 or 8 amps per circuit. We have 8 panels with Enphase IQ7Xs on them, 1 on each of them, wired into a wire with 2 wires for the 240 volts AC. That's what you get out of an Enphase. There's no neutral. And then we brought down a ground, tying all the panels together, that ties into this panel. And we put the 2 wires on 240 volt AC circuit breakers. I don't even know what these are, but it doesn't matter. A 20 would be fine, but whatever you have. So we have 5 circuit breakers, 2 wires to each for 240 volts. And that applies that to our loads panel as your house is designed. Your L1 and L2 are your 2 phases. It's actually 1 phase split. We get the neutral from our power system, not from the roof. And we have a ground coming from the roof. And this is a midnight solar transient voltage suppressor that we put between the 2 phases on the master switch, L1 and L2, and ground. And that should take out any spikes. And then we bring that out of the panel and over to a real loads panel for this part of the shop. And we'll take a look at that in a minute. I'm becoming a big fan of Enphase. This company has had a checkered past. They've got a good technology and a good concept. They've been very poorly done as a company. They have their manufacturing done by Flex in China, have become subject to the tariffs. They're rebuilding a Flex factory in Mexico to avoid that. But they're kind of expensive. We hear this from people all the time. I think an IQ7X about $148. Well, you tack that on top of a panel, and it gets to be an expense. But it's a very good system because every panel becomes a 240 volt AC source. And they're individually sourced. So the whole concept of maximum power point tracking becomes integral to the system. You can shade one panel, it has no effect on the other ones. And it doesn't matter. Every panel puts out what it can at 240 volts AC. And so that's the thing. Enphase has got a new infusion of capital, a new chief executive officer. Their stock's gone from $5 to $20 in the last year. And this month, July, they're celebrating their 20 millionth unit that they've put out. We have Solar Edge here in the shop, which is the 800-pound gorilla as far as market share. And we have Enphase, which is gaining market share from Solar Edge. And I've run the 2 of them for over a year now, and we considerably prefer the Enphase. Enphase is going to win on this, and I can tell you how you can tell. SunPower is one of the largest installers in the country. I don't like them. They got a great panel, 22% efficient. They only sell it through approved installers. And the whole SunPower game is rigged for profit and for a very high expense for you. But it's a great panel. And they have done an equity swap with Enphase and replaced their version of a microinverter with the Enphase microinverter. And so they put Enphase microinverters with all of their panels now. Panasonic has followed suit and in March began shipments of their N300E version of their HIT panel. And all our panels on this side are Panasonic HITs. Now, they've combined this with what Enphase is calling their AC module, which is a much smaller unit that goes right on the back of the panel, connects very directly to the output of the panel, kind of pops up out of the shipping position to put a little air under it for thermals. And I wish I could buy those. They're really cute. But Panasonic is introducing that as an AC module. And Solaria, which is one of the largest panel manufacturers in operating in the U.S. They're kind of a U.S. company owned by the Chinese. I don't get it, you know. Probably involved with Huawei and have listening devices on your solar panels. I don't know. But anyway, they have introduced also an AC module, which is a full panel with a Enphase microinverter built into the panel. I think this is the model of the future because the panels themselves are well under a watt now. But it's still $1.75 or even $2 installed. And that is because of the installation. When the panel already has a microinverter installed in it, it becomes a function of racking and running essentially house wire and conduit across the roof and down to your loads panel or to a combiner panel like this that is connected to your loads panel. I've been following technology for 40 years, and there's just some characteristics of winners and some characteristics of losers that become visceral after a while. And Enphase is going to win. Right now, I'm not too sure they're not losing money on every sale, but it doesn't matter. Once they get market share, they're going to be it. And so the whole concept of the high voltage DC and the power controllers and so forth that SolarEdge gets is, I think, yesterday's concept. And the new one is going to be photovoltaic panels that put out 240 volts AC natively or appear to do so. And Enphase is leading that charge. It just simplifies installation. It simplifies configuration. It just makes everything much easier. So that's our combiner panel. And we go out our master switch out the top sideways. We actually use the normal place you would bring into the master switch for our cabling from the roof. And we go out this cable and over to our loads panel. Let's go take a look at what we've got going there. So here is our cable from the Enphase combiner box. And that goes to this 240 volt AC circuit breaker. What is that, Anna? 100 amp?
Yes, sir. 100 amp circuit breaker.
100 amp circuit breaker. And here is a couple of Sense control transformers and one black Enphase control transformers. We're censored up pretty good. And up here are two white Sense control transformers and two black Enphase. And this is also we can measure. So our power comes in here from the Enphase combiner box, and we have power coming in from the grid, or in this case our PowerSafe 100 in the other room, in the top through this master switch. And we're measuring that with two different devices, and we're measuring this input with two different devices. A 60 hertz 240 volt waveform coming in here will go out this cable to and up to the roof to our Enphase microinverters. They detect that and come online and start producing power at just a little higher voltage than what they sense. And that power comes in here and to all these other load breakers, to refrigerators and lights and stuff here in this part of the shop. And actually out one of them down here and up and over to our upstairs area, where there's all kinds of lights and a furnace and so forth up there. And this goes back to our main loads panel in the room where the PowerSafe is. So the power produced by the Enphase is first used by these circuits, and that's what they power. And any excess power goes through the master switch and back over to power the other side of the shop. We have 13,800 watts in 5 circuits of the 8 Panasonic 330s, I think, or 320s, 8-track keys. And so this time of year, we're making quite a bit of power. Enphase makes a very interesting device. We've got it hung on the side here, and it goes to those black sensors. But this is called the Envoy IQ. And it is an Enphase device and a non-trivial one, and it's almost $500, I think. But it does a very interesting thing. It communicates with every single one of our 40 IQ 7X microinverters over the power wires. And it uses a thing that's been around for 20 years that I know of, called power line communications. And that is a digital data train that rides on top of the much slower 60 hertz AC power train. The problem is we have a fan plugged in here with an electric motor, and it kind of dicks up the digital power, digital PLC, they call it, power line communications, that goes over the power wires. The net result is PLC sort of kind of works, and if you're patient, you just keep sending inquiries and keep listening for responses and gradually accrue them over time around the noise. It's not instantaneous like we think of as CAN or Wi-Fi or anything like that, because they've never actually gotten it to work. Now, it works under its own terms if you're used to dealing with networking and communications. It appears not to be working. But if you're patient and you just keep throwing the same messages and keep listening to the same messages and keep a library of what you sent and what you got, over time, you'll get data. And that's what they do. So it could be a few seconds or a few minutes to pull all those. And in fact, the Enphase will pull all the microinverters and make that data available. It's updated every 5 minutes, which is glacial for most purposes. Fortunately, it comes with this control transformer. You have to buy the other two extra, but they're 22 or 27 bucks a piece. And it can do much more real-time power in total using those control transformers. And of course, it has the voltage of the system because that's what powers it and what it uses to communicate with.
Yep.
And so we can get some pretty good real-time power data from our Enphase system. If we want data per microinverter, that's only updated once every 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And I guess the theory is in 5 minutes, this will support up to 600
Wow.
Enphase microinverters. We got 40. So I guess they're thinking that they can more or less pull all of them in 300 seconds, which, as I say in data communications terms, it's glacial. It's
slow.
epoch communications. You have your crustacean transmitter period and your Paleozoic reception period and so forth. But for our purposes, practically, what's your hurry? 5 minutes is 5 minutes. And so this is a gateway device to interface PLC communications to the microinverters to the rest of the world. And the way it does that is with Wi-Fi and your router, your home Wi-Fi access point. A lot of you just call them a router, but they're properly a Wi-Fi access point. 2.4 gigahertz, 2.41, I think, and in that zone. And ideally, your home router will be connected to the internet. And the way they sell this is that they send data from here in JavaScript text, JSON, out through your router, out through the internet to their cloud-based sort of Amazon, Oz cloud online service, which they term Enlighten. And they present probably the ugliest solar interface I've ever seen. Actually, it's growing on me. They're a little movie. You can play a movie of the last 15 minutes, which doesn't feel very real time to me. But and a lot of the data is quite delayed. And then they have an application program interface, an API, to that where you can write software to access that data via the Enlighten online service. And all that is well and good. They're kind of actually it's a shit show of passwords for the homeowners and passwords and an app on your phone for the installer, and then a separate installer password if you wanted to get on a little web server they actually have in the gateway. And so they, in their documentation, will tell you to get it from your installer, who, number one, doesn't want you to have it because he wants to charge you for every trip to come check your system.
Yep.
And number two, half the time, he doesn't really mind you having it. He's not too sure what you're talking about. And so, in Enphase's documentation, they'll tell you to call them. Well, that's another episode in a life that's designed to be a test and a learning experience for you as you go from birth to death, that you should, at some point in your life, have to talk to Enphase product support. It's for your sins. It builds character. But after 2 hours of pleading and explaining, we did finally find a guy at Enphase, sympathetic to our cause, who did give us an installer password. We've since found a guy who's made a little application that if you know the serial number, would you show them the bottom of the thing?
It's on there.
Yeah, it's the serial number's on a little sticker on here.
Back here too.
If you know that serial number, and you know that the login is the magic secret keyword installer, it will generate your password for you, and then you have access to this on your local system, and so you can get using HTTP onto the IP number of the system, which is using MDNS, Multicast Domain Name Service. It's listed as envoy.local on your local network. And so it's kind of like Bonjour, or for you Linux guys, Avahi. It's associates a advertised name with a local internet protocol number address, octet. And so it is possible to access certain data on the gateway in your local network without having to go out to the Enlightened Cloud service and use their goofy API to do all this. You can get it from the Envoy gateway itself. They don't tell you about this. They don't document it. They try to prevent it. I don't have any idea why. This company, I'm very excited about it. Like I said, I bought, 5,000 shares at $5. They're trading at 20 bucks. They're taking over the world. And they act like they don't have enough sense to go indoors during the rain a lot of the time. There's no reason for this to even be a secret. This is on your network, and the information's there. And now it is in JSON format, but that's readable by human beings. It's just text. Kind of arranged in parentheses so you can parse it easily. So I showed you in the last episode how to do that. In this one, we're going to talk about doing that programmatically. And in fact, Colin and I, very collaboratively, have developed a library for the Envoy for use with the ESP32 microcontroller. It's not a full application program, and so that gets in my wheelhouse for open source. The reason we don't open source everything is not precisely corporate greed. It's what color should the background be? And some clown thinks it ought to be pink, and I think it ought to be green. Who the hell cares? It's my program. But for the basic kernel items, I don't have any problem in publishing that. And so we've open sourced a library to go get this data and parse it out for the ESP32, where you can build your own application. And that's a free and open source library. And we're doing an application which won't be free and open source, because it's a bunch of stuff I think I want to do, which is going to be different than the stuff you think you want to do. And we're not going to open source that and have 12,000 comments about how we ought to do it different. And so that's really the delineation between proprietary and open source around here, is how much of you have I got to listen to about how that should have been done. And so the heart of it, the basics of getting the data, I mean, it's pretty much cut and dry. There'll be some comments and some changes, but it's a very defined area. We open sourced the Generalized Electric Vehicle Control Unit years ago, and it was a nightmare of people sending me messages about how things felt and what they look like. But just very personal preference. We got in a big brouhaha over how the car felt to drive, and the guy I'm talking to doesn't have a car and has never driven it. But he's trying to tell me how it should feel, and that I've got it wrong in the code in a yellow VW thing that I'm driving down the road. It was a surreal conversation. So that's why we seem to be a little odd about sharing in open source. If it's something sufficiently defined that I can share it without hearing your life story, theory of God, the universe, and life, we'll consider opening that up. So that's where we're going with that. But we have kind of figured out the Envoy data access and can access it usefully and find useful data to detect how the Enphase works. And it is my opinion, and I've had to have this discussion several times this week, which is why I'm sharing it, despite these ass clowns being lost in space, I think they have the model for the future of residential solar.
Indeed.
I'm not sure this applies to commercial situations, but for putting solar on your roof, it just makes it easier, safer really, simpler, less components. It's the simplest possible system. The basic system is you put solar panels with Enphase microinverters on them, and you wire it into your loads panel, and you're done. Code-wise, you're supposed to have a shut-off switch for that on the outside of the building.
Yeah.
That's the only complication. That is the solar system. All our efforts are going to be about how to put a battery and an off-grid inverter that plugs into that. And again, I've said this before, it's not precisely making it across. The main advantage of that is not that we can charge the batteries from the AC on the microgrids, although that's a huge advantage. The main advantage is the Enphase power comes down to that combiner panel, into this panel, and out these circuits to the loads. The battery, the other inverter, is in the other room. It doesn't go through it. It doesn't see it. It sees the waveform from it. That's what it syncs to. But the power passes through here and out to my refrigerator without ever touching it. And if there's any left over, it goes back over there to that loads panel and goes out to all those loads before it ever goes into my battery to charge it. So we've circumvented the 15 kilowatt limitation of my off-grid inverter, and the power is distributed through the house wiring directly to the loads without any interference or careful genius administrations of my equipment or pudgy little fingers. And so it bypasses me. And our efforts at a battery and an off-grid inverter is a plug-in device into that house. And it just plugs into a loads panel. It's not between anything. It just plugs in, and we can do battery backup. We can fake a grid because we are a grid. And if it produces more power than we can use in the building, we stuff it in the batteries. And if that gets full and it's still making too much power, we can actually shut them off for 5 minutes and let them think about just what that means, what a privilege it is to be on and to come on in a little bit better behaved manner 5 minutes from now.
5 minutes from now.
And that's the thing. We're going to take a look here in a bit at a little device James and I have been working on to monitor that power out of the Enphase Envoy and maybe do useful things with it. Stay with us. Recall, if you will, the entire PowerSafe 100 concept originated with a gentleman named Walter Crumbly, who has a new home he was building in his place in Costa Rica. Several rental cabins. I think he's got a little bar and restaurant there. And he wanted some power. Costa Rica makes great claims to being almost 100% renewable energy. And that means that they shut it down every afternoon for a little while and have to renew it, I guess, because he said he was getting 30 power interruptions a month, and that endangered his fish. And he was feeding these fish, hoping that they would make fish scat at the bottom of the tank, which he collects and makes some sort of dietary supplement or something out of it. And so he started describing his perfect system to me, and I explained to him why none of that could be done, and then spent the next 6 months trying to figure out a way to do it. We shipped that months ago, I think February, and he's had an arm injury and some other events, episodes getting his Panasonic panels and Enphase microinverters, and he got all that gathered up in Tampa, shipped to Costa Rica through Costa Rican customs at extraordinary expense, and as we saw in a recent episode, hauled up a mountain to his place there. And just this week, he managed to extract it from the crate. You recall Wayne Reavers turned his crate into a goat house. Walter says he's going to build housing for his employees with this crate. So my crate guys, at extraordinary expense and work, we have been desperate for these PowerSafes to arrive intact, and so has spent some on the crates. And so far, everyone is more impressed with the crate than they are with the PowerSafe 100. That said, Walter did get it out of the crate this week and got it on its feet. Loves the eyelets on the top and the brakes on the wheels, and had a couple of questions about configuration, and we kind of exchanged just a couple of emails about it, and he got it up. Now, I don't do this for all the V2 controllers, but for the PowerSafes, I already have them preloaded with my credentials, and so they pass their IoT data from the MQTT protocol through our Oz IoT account, our IoT Core account, so that I could potentially look at what's going on with their system and assist them if there's a problem. Well, what have I done? Made it go away, I guess. This is a display, like any of our others, but we have it tuned in to the Walter Crumbly publication. We subscribe to that in our configuration. And this is the data from his PowerSafe 100, which I'm very pleased to announce is now up and online. And with all that PowerSafe 100 goodness, he appears to be using about 700 watts. So I'm not sure he had quite as much need of electricity as he quite sold me on, but he's got enough at 700 watts. He can run that for about a month. Actually, he said he had it up to 6.5 kilowatts today. Hasn't got the solar hooked up to it. But there it is, and here it is. I'm just VNC'd into the display. And that is from Costa Rica to the internet through Amazon's Oz IoT Core. down through our router and into that display, and then I'm using VNC to display that here on my laptop. And so we're kind of celebrating here right now the first PowerSafe 100 that we've shipped. They've gotten it and they have it up online, and we can view its operation. So we're pretty giddy about that. I just described for you our Enphase kind of homemade combiner box, and our loads panel with the Envoy on it. The Envoy has been a little bit of a problem, and I have certainly obsessed on it and then gotten Colin involved with it for a couple of months now. And the heart of the problem is the Envoy does make some data available directly through your local system, where you don't have to go out to their Enlighten or go through that API or anything. But it uses the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, HTTP, and it requires authentication. And it advertises on your local local network using multicast domain name service, MDNS, as envoy.local, but then it requires a password, a login name and a password to access it. The login is installer, INSTALLER in all cases. And in a recent episode, I described how you could access that using a browser and generate a password using a small program written by the computer person in the UK who wishes to remain anonymous, to generate an installer password, which you need. We don't really want to get access to that data using a browser. We use our ESP32 or our Raspberry Pi devices to do most of this stuff. And I kind of got it up my butt to do it with the ESP32, which is kind of unfortunate. They have a library in the Arduino core put out by Espressif for the ESP32 chip called HTTP client. And this is how you access a website or a hypertext transfer protocol location using Wi-Fi. The problem is it's broken. It claims to be compliant with HTTP version 1.1 and to do both basic and digest authentication. That's two different kind of versions of authentication, where you could programmatically access it, preload the installer login and your password, and gain immediate access to it without having to go through the little pop-up screen that asks you for your login and your password. And of course, our objective is to get all the data, which is transmitted using JSON, the JavaScript kind of version of XML text format, to extract that data into programmatic variables. I actually entered a issue or a bug report with Espressif in April because HTTP client would not actually perform authentication. using the digest format. And digest is a little more advanced than the basic authentication. You not only have to have a installer name and password, but it's kind of a two-step procedure, and they pass you a nonce token, and you send back a C-nonce token, and of course the name and the password. And it's kind of a two-step procedure, but that should be in the HTTP client library that Espresso publishes for the ESP32 chip. It doesn't work. And so Colin and I kind of obsessed on this for a while, and finally wrote some code that would kind of sort of do this. And then we found something else broken in the HTTP client where it kind of did streams in a very broken fashion. And so we had to deal with that. The result was we finally got to where we could access Envoy to do this. We're kind of funny about publishing our source code in that we do and we don't. I had a bad experience with open source with a program called JevQ and a guy named Michael Neuweiler, I think. It got into a big argument about how the braking system should feel on an electric car, which was sort of stunning because I had one and he didn't. And without getting too technical, we had a motor driver parent class and then child classes for each type of motor, the UQM and the Siemens. And he actually had a Brusa motor, and he wanted us to change the parent class to accommodate the way he thought the braking should feel. And I liked it just the way it was. Big brouhaha fight over it. It was actually quite amazing, since I had a car where I could go drive it and brake, and he did not have a car running yet. So it was an amazing discussion. But he decided to fire me for my own open source program and fork it and take it over and be the JevQ. Again, it was a little mystifying to have an argument with somebody about how something felt when I could feel it and he couldn't. And now this was doubly perplexing to me, and that he was going to steal JevQ and take it away from me, which is not precisely how you do it in open source. You fork it, and then you add whatever you want, and that's fine. But he wanted to proclaim that to be the JevQ, and in fact went out and registered the jevq.com domain name and so on and so forth. The reason this is perplexing is we made the hardware that this software was entirely dependent on, and we had the video series that it was all about. And he had an email address and a GitHub account. Now, how is this going to come out? Within a month, nobody knew who he was or that there was a fork to JevQ. And we just continued. And by the way, you can go find his fork now. He's added hundreds of things, helter-skelter. Some of them, the guy's actually a brilliant coder, by the way. Amazing software code writer. But like many of them, no clue as to how to put a fence around it or define it. So we do not release our source code anymore, unless it enables something and is clearly defined. We have, to this date, the only application program that lets you use Tesla Model S modules which doesn't make any sense to me because we open source the part of the code that actually talks to the BMS boards on the Tesla battery modules 2.5 years ago. Now, it's a little techy, but that's how you talk to the boards. And everything after that was kind of how it feels. I don't want to have discussions about what color the screen is or how we did this or how we did that. That's my application program, and that's how we did it. So it's not going to be open source at all. No, I won't send you the source code. No, I won't teach you how to program that. But the underlying kernel of technology that would enable you to write your own application has been in the public domain for 2.5 years. Similarly, with the Envoy, we have published on GitHub, on Colin's GitHub account, GitHub/Colin80, the Envoy library. And it will automatically determine the IP number of envoy.local on your network. It will, you can even set it up to automatically poll it for this data. And it has a huge number of public variables that you can access, just like envoy.freq for the frequency, or envoy.pf for the power factor, and a whole lot of data that I'm not going to use in here. That's on a GitHub. It pretty much works. And that's what I'm going to show you today. I'm actually not going to show it to you today. I'm going to show you the application program and why we're fooling with all this. But if you want to write your own application your way, the Envoy library will let you do that quite easily. And it will handle all the dirty details, not only of accessing the Envoy device on your network, but of parsing the JSON text that it puts out and putting that into variables for you to access in your ESP32 program. It's not going to run on something else, but it is all C++. It would be doable to port that to some other device, also in C++. So, Dr. Gresh has put me together. Actually, he's done a couple of them. This is the second prototype of a box we're probably going to call the Envoy Diversion Loads Manager. And this is our regular ESP32 board with our BMS shield on it. Now, the reason I'm using this shield is it has 4 isolated MOSFETs on it that we can switch with our microcontroller, and they will handle about 6 or 7 amps of current at 12 volts briefly. And for contactors, big gigawatt contactors, we need 2.5 or 3 amps for just a pulse, and then about 250 milliamps to keep them on. And we brought those 4 outputs out to, I thought this was kind of cunning. We don't want this to be a $2,500 device like the controller. So this is some speaker terminals to have little spring-loaded clips on them where you can plug in ground and 12 volts for a relay or a contactor. And these are some little, very inexpensive light-emitting diodes that show you which ones of those are on at any one time. And so we can do a couple of things with this. We monitor the Envoy for its power output. But we also can receive over user datagram protocol, UDP packets, really CAN data from our BMS controller showing its voltage, its current, its power, and its state of charge. We have the further ability to probably add other inputs to that. And we write some software where you can configure this to make decisions based on your power output. For example, we could have diversion load 1 come on when the net power of the Envoy is above 1,000 watts, and have it turn back off when it fell to 500 watts. And we could take diversion load 2, and we could have that come on when the Envoy net power, the power produced minus the power you were consuming, went above 3,000 watts. And that would normally go into the battery, but I don't want it to go into the battery. My battery's full. And so I'm going to turn on relay 2 and turn on a diversion load. And we have 4 of those, and we can set them to different values of Envoy power or a battery power or state of charge. And so we can control 4 devices based on our power production of our photovoltaic array. And so I call it the Envoy Diversion Loads Manager. Now, what would a diversion load be? Well, obviously something like a water heater. Water heater can take 4 or 6 or even 10 kilowatts of purely resistive load to heat water. And you have to do that, but there's no particular time when you need to do it. When you heat water in a water tank, the tank's insulated and will kind of retain that heat until you use the water or until it slowly over time radiates the heat. And so water heaters don't tend to be time sensitive. You can heat up a certain amount of water kind of at your convenience. What would another example be? A hot tub might work the same way. I have had some aspirations of making a water generator that uses kind of a low power air conditioner to remove humidity from the air and by condensation, and then save that water. And I have one from China that I've had for 2 years that I've never gotten around to putting together, that's supposed to do 30 liters a day, depending on your humidity, of course. Missouri in the summer, we have enough humidity to get a drink of water with a glass. We can just run it through the air and get enough humidity to make a little bit of a drink of water. So that would probably work very well. So we can make very pure distilled water from excess sun power. We have a 38 kilowatt array here for a number of reasons. We test, it's actually 2 arrays using 2 different kinds of microinverters. and we perform all sorts of testing. So we have a bit more solar than even a PowerSafe 100 can quite absorb. We're basically at 100% charge by 10 in the morning, 9 in the morning, most mornings. So then I've got all this sunlight. As you know, we're selfish. I don't want to share it with the grid. So we actually have to shut off solar panels using our frequency shift and so forth. But what if instead of doing the frequency shift and shutting it off, I could simply divert it to another load? We did put a small RS485 converter board in the bottom and ran our sort of special serial port that Colin contrived out of AND gates to act as a level shifter and so forth. And we've run that out to a conversion board to drive an RS485 output, which you can see I've got on an audio jack. How about electric vehicle charging as a diversion load? What would make a great one if you could control it? I've kind of got mixed emotions about this in that we've got electric cars here all the time, so this makes sense for us. I see this discussed a lot. I'm not too sure it isn't a solution in search of a problem, because the sun shines during the day, and you ought to be off at work during the day. And so your electric car isn't going to be anywhere where this is going to do any good. I really don't picture people sitting around the middle of the day watching their electric car charge, although we do that here. But for most of you who sell Progressive Insurance or something like that, I can't imagine this really mattering. So I'm not too sure this is a solution. This is a Tesla wall charger. This is actually a signature edition of the Tesla wall charger. And in recent years, they have set these up to where it is possible to have 3 or 4 of these in one garage and on one circuit. And so let's say you had an 80 amp circuit. You could set these up to where they're all linked together by a data cable, and however you plug in cars, it will share that amount of current among those chargers. And it does this with a little data connection here, an RS485 in and an RS485 out. And James has put me a little audio jack right here on the side and wired it to our RS485 input. There's also a little rotary switch here where you select your level of current that you'll allow on the charger, and you kind of base that on your circuit that you're plugged into. How much current can it make before it burns your garage to the ground? And so you set that to that value. But it does have a setting F. I don't know what the F's for, but that makes it a slave to incoming RS485 signals to control the amount of current that this wall charger will put out right now. And that can be changed moment to moment and hour to hour and so forth. In this way, you can set up one of them, link it to the second one, from the out of this one to the in of the next one, and from the out of that one to the in of the next one. And the one where you have it set to a number will act as the master, and all the other ones act as slaves. And this is done with a very simple RS-485 protocol. A guy, again, who only goes by the name CD Dragon, has done a Python program to do this and has worked out this protocol. We don't program in Python, and our ESP32, I suppose, could be set up to run Python, but it might be some work to even do that, so we're not going to. We'll try to decode his Python open source program, which he calls TWC Manager, and port that into the ESP32 to let it run the Tesla wall charger. And in this way, in theory, with our RS-485 output, we could control a Tesla wall charger from 5 amps to, I don't know, 80 amps. I know it'll do 48 on a Model 3. And that's got a 10 kilowatt charger. My Model S has 20 kilowatts of chargers, so it probably would do 80 amps at 240 volts. And so as the clouds go over and my power production of the Enphase array vary, or as the charging into and out of the battery goes, from charging to discharging and back to charging because of passing clouds, when the sun's out, I could have it increase the current rate on the charging to the car, and when the sun goes behind a cloud, it could immediately decrease that to a much lower level. And so I can have the car charging, or the water heater for that matter. Well, the water heater I'd have to turn off and on, but with the RS-485, I can actually vary the level of the car charging with the level of production of photovoltaic power by observing either the Envoy or my PowerSafe 100. This is a development project. This is a prototype. It's not yet available from EVTV, but I thought I would show you what we're working on and why. The adoption of the Enphase by Panasonic and SunPower and Solaria to build those into the panels has got me convinced that this is going to be the 800-pound gorilla in grid-tied systems and microinverter systems going forward. And you can debate that and tell me about Hoy Millies and APS and MOUSE all you want. I've been following technology a long time, and there's always a leader and someone who eventually consolidates most of that market. And I've decided that however goofy a company they are, or difficult to deal with they may be, Enphase is going to be that in microinverters, and particularly in residential installations, because the combination of that microinverter with the panels themselves really reduces the component count, or the individual component count, and the installation effort that has to be made to put up a solar system. Basically, if you get a Panasonic N300E AC module, 1 or 100, and physically mount them someplace in the sunshine, it's trivial to wire them together and into your circuit breaker panel in your house and have solar power. And our mission with our controller, the PowerSafe 100, the PowerSafe 60, all of that line, what we're focused on is make that as easy to simply plug in to your electric system and act as a storage system where you can flip off the grid most of the time and use that with an existing microgrid, grid-tied inverter system. We work fine with the Solar Edge. We actually are set up to work with any of them, but I think Enphase is where we want to focus. And so that's the purpose of the Envoy Diversion Loads Manager. It doesn't have to be next to it. It has to be on the same Wi-Fi network with it. But it doesn't go out to it goes out to the internet to get time, and I may add some functions for time of day management. Although that doesn't make a lot of sense to me because we know what time of day the sun's going to be out the most, and that's around noon. But it does go and get NTP Network Time Protocol time from the National Institute of Science and Technology in Boulder, Colorado. So it's the correct time, and but it does not go out on the net to get Envoy data from Envoy's Enlighten service or through their API. It gets directly from the Envoy device on your own network. We've got a little 5 amp, 12 volt wall wart plugged in here with a standard 2.1 by 5 millimeter barrel jack. So any 12 volt wall wart will work, but I would recommend something, 4 or 5 amps, particularly if you're going to be switching big gigavac contactors. If you're switching little 30 amp Bosch relays, I wouldn't worry with it. Any 12 volt that has that kind of barrel connector. We'll ship it with a DC supply. You just plug into an AC outlet. So that's where it'll get its power. You can program it and configure it with a USB port, but that's not going to run those LEDs or those switch MOSFETs. It has to have the 12 volts to actually turn something off and on. And so that's our current project, or one of our many projects that I'm working on. I've actually been putting a stupid amount of time in this. It's like one of those things that just annoyed me. With Espressif should have their HTTP client to do this without a lot of effort from me, but it was broken. And then it was also broken in the way it handled streaming. And so we had to do that. Did a library, did a program to do all this, moved it off into a library that can be included in any ESP32 program, and then wrote an application program. I'm still writing it, actually, to manage all that. Let's take a look at the program itself. All right, we are restarting the program. We found EVTV, and we've got our time mark. We connected to the EVTV Wi-Fi hub. We have a minus 68, minus 50, something like that. Signal strength, dBm. And we've discovered an Enphase Envoy at 192.168.1.138. Again, that's advertised using MSDNS, or MDNS, multicast domain name service. It's kind of like Bonjour for Apple, or Avahi for Linux. It's a way of advertising local items by name, but we need the IP number to access it. Here we're receiving a UDP protocol, or UDP packets with CAN data in them that tell us that our battery system, our V2 controller on the PowerSafe 100, is notifying that we're at 48 volts DC, we're charging at 57 amps, we're at 100% stated charge, and we're seeing 2700 watts of power. Although we apparently just kicked in a frequency shift, turned off all of our solar, and are now putting out 9,000 watts of power and 196 amps. We view any discharge from the battery as a negative. Envoy power has gone to 0. Our consumption is at 703 watts, and our net power is a minus 704 watts. Our Envoy voltage is 242 volts RMS. We're at 60 hertz. Today we've produced 63.55 kilowatt hours of Envoy power, and our production for the past week has been 379 kilowatts. Around here, that's about $40 worth of electricity in a week. This is diversionary loads, and they're all listed as off right now. Our next screen is our configuration screen, and here is where we put in our station set identifier, EVTV, and our password to get on our local hub, our WPA2 password. And here is our Envoy password. We have to have that. That's your installer password that you get from the program. And I'll put a link up here to it that the computer person posted that works on Android devices to generate a installer password from your Envoy serial number that's on the Envoy box. This is a time zone string. You can just put CST for Central Standard Time or EST for Eastern Standard Time. This is a longer TZ string format that tells it what date and hour we change to daylight savings time, what date and hour we change back, and kind of an advanced version of that. Our UDP port is 6500, and this is a port we want to listen to for battery controller data, and it simply has to match whatever we have in the BMS controller. And this is our 4 diversion loads. We can turn the load switch on or off based on state of charge and on 2 different values. You can turn it on at 100% or 90%, off at 80%, that sort of thing. Amp 1 on and off is based on battery current level. And again, positive current levels are charging and negative current levels are discharging. And our Envoy 1 on and off, that's based on net power. That's the produced power minus the consumed power. You have a net power level, and this would be Envoy 1 we turn on at 1,000 watts of net power and off at 500, while Envoy 2 we would turn on at 2,000 watts and off at 1,000. And load 3 we turn on at 4,000 watts net power from the Envoy and off at 2,000. And load 4, big load, we're going to turn on at 9,000 watts and off at 8,000. And so it's kind of progressive. You can do this in a lot of different combinations to control those 4 outputs. The next screen, E, I'm going to enter an E here, and this gives me an Envoy screen. Now this could get corrupted and it might reboot the machine, and I don't know what, it takes a while to come up because it gets literally everything that we have any interest in from the Envoy, including all 40 of our Envoy Enphase microinverters. And it shows how many watts they're currently producing and what their peak watt for each microinverter has been so far today. And so you can see they'll put out 300, 310 watts from those Panasonic HIT panels. This is by serial number, so we can actually use this to analyze and troubleshoot our entire network. Now we have 40 Enphase microinverters up there on 40 panels. Enphase networks can handle up to 600, so you can see this would be quite a scrolling list. Our program, our library will only do about 200, simply because this is in a big array of string values for the serial number and integers for the power and the peak power. And so it takes up quite a bit of memory if you get up to 600 panels. But you could indeed set it up for that. This is telling me that we located 40 inverters and reminding me the individual inverter data is delayed 5 minutes. Now that might be 5 minutes, it depends on when it was last done, but it updates every 5 minutes. Total microinverter power at the moment is 223 watts. Total microinverter peak power has been 12,285. And that's really the end of the inverter inventory data. This is some meter stream data that gives us a pretty real-time level of power on phase A and phase B. That's not really accurate. They call Enphase actually calls it that, but phase A and phase B, there's only 2 wires, and they're measuring each of them compared to ground for voltage and current and power, but listing the power factor and the frequency for each of them separately. I'm not too sure how useful any of that is. So here's the power produced from that, the total voltage, the current, the power consumed, and your net power. There is and this is what we use most of and like, is a production.json file that is quite real time. It's within the last few seconds anyway. And it gives us our production power, our current, our voltage, how many kilowatts we produced today, for the last 7 days, and for a lifetime. And then it also gives us consumption power, and that's shown as a negative, the power we consumed, and current and voltage. That's the currently, and then how many kilowatt hours we've used today, last 7 days, and lifetime. And then the net of that power is, right now we're producing 6536. And now you can see our data on our individuals is starting to catch up again. It's delayed by 5 minutes. Here's our kilowatt hours today, kilowatt hours last 7 days, and our megawatt hours lifetime. Maybe $425 worth of electricity since we installed the Envoy, not since we installed the Enphase. And so this is a lot of data that you can look at that's interesting. More to analyze what's going on with your microinverters. We've still got a couple that aren't up yet. Frequencies, power factors, voltages, and so forth. Mostly just informational. And most of the time, what you're going to be interested with is your main screen, which shows your 4 diverter outputs, diversion load outputs, and kind of what they're based on. Your configuration screen allows you to modify that, and this is just a information screen. And so here we go. This updates much more frequency, much more frequently. And it shows you the basics and what's going on with your loads. Most of the time, once you have it configured, you probably won't even be plugged into it with a laptop. It runs on 12 volts, and you can kind of observe which loads are on with LEDs, and it'll come on and go off based on your power.